Welcome back, everybody, to the second half of the two-day International Interdisciplinary Conference on Masculinities in India, Mapping Alternative Masculinities, organized by UGC-sponsored Women's Studies Center, Lady Bribon College, Kolkata, in collaboration with Research Center for Women's Studies and Department of English, SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. First of all, I would like to call upon our respected chair, Dr. Aparna Bandyopadhyay, our favorite Aparna Ji. A few words about her. Dr. Aparna Bandyopadhyay is an associate professor in history at Harbour Women's University, West Bengal, India. She has formerly an associate professor in history in the West Bengal Education Service and had served several government colleges, including Lady Bribon College, Kolkata. Dr. Bandyopadhyay was awarded her doctoral degree from the School of Women's Studies, Charu Gupta University, Kolkata, in 2012. Her book, titled Desire and Defiance, A Study of Bengali Women in Love, 1850 to 1930, based on her doctoral dissertation, was published by Orient Black Swan in 2016. She has co-edited several anthologies on women's studies. She has recently co-edited her story, a fest script for Professor Geraldine Forbes. Her latest publication is Nari Itihash Nana Proshongo, a collection of 25 articles on women's history written in Bengali. Her research interests encompass the social history of colonial Bengal with a focus on social reform, women's everyday lives, violence, intimacy, emotions, leisure, women's writings, and Bengali cinema. Welcome, Aparna. Thank you. Now, let me introduce our next speaker. Dr. Charu Gupta is a senior professor of modern India at the Department of History, University of Delhi. The focus of her research is gender, sexuality, masculinity, caste, religious identities, and vernacular literatures in early 20th century, North India. Her latest book, Hindu Histories, Caste, Ayurveda, Travel, and Communism in early 20th century, has been co-published by Permanent Black and SUNY Press. Her other books include Sexuality, Obscenity, Community, Women, Muslims, and the Hindu Public in Colonial India. Permanent Black, 2001, and Palgrave, 2002. The Gender of Caste, representing Dalits in print. Gendering Colonial India, Reforms, Print, Caste and Communalism. Caste and Life Narratives and Literary Sentiments in the Vernacular, Gender and Genre in Modern South Asia. She serves on the editorial boards of leading journals like South Asia, Journal of South Asian Studies, South Asia Research and Gender and History. A PhD graduate from SOAS University of London. She has been a distinguished visiting scholar in residence, Rutgers University, visiting fellow at Newberner Collegium for Culture and Society, University of Chicago, visiting professor and ICCR chair, University of Vienna, visiting faculty, Yale University and Washington University, and Rama Waterman Distinguished Indian Visiting Scholar, University of Hawaii. She has also been a fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Delhi, Social Science Research Council, New York, Asian Scholarship Foundation, Thailand, Wellcome Institute, London, and University of Oxford. Madam Charu Gupta's groundbreaking work continues to shape the understanding of gender, sexuality, caste, and popular Hindi print in Indian history. Madam, the stage is yours now.
Professor Charu Gupta, you begin your lecture. Thanks, a very warm thanks for inviting me. And Aparna, I must say I've been an admirer of your work and and I teach your book to my students. So it is indeed a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to try and first share my PowerPoint and see if it's working. Are you able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, great. So, basically, this session or the overall workshop is on alternative masculinities, and this session is about history writing and alternative masculinities. So I'm sure you have been listening to many, wonderful scholars like Srimati Basu and others, and they must have already said some of the points that I'm going to broadly say and then frame my lecture on that. So the study of masculinity has been integral to gender and historical scholarship in India, particularly over the past few decades. And just as the study of ruling classes is essential for understanding class dynamics, examining men and masculinities is crucial for gender analysis. So, masculinity, like other identity categories, is a mobile, plural, historically contingent, socially constructed, and relational concept, which is structured by power differentials. So scholars have unfolded colonial constructions of the body via a dichotomy between the manly British and the effeminate colonial subject. So the hyper-masculine British male was portrayed often as rational, scientific, progressive, active, and martial, justifying colonial domination. And in contrast, the Indian male, particularly the Bengali Babu, was caricatured as effeminate, superstitious, irrational, weak, and incapable of self-governance. So this colonial narrative of emasculation provoked a range of responses from Indian reformers, nationalists, religious leaders. So, for example, Swami Vivekananda sought to merge Hindu spirituality with Western physical culture to forge a more muscular Hindu identity. Similarly, we know Bankim Chandra reimagined Hindu masculinity through literature, recasting Krishna as a warrior figure rather than a playful lover. So by the 1920s, Hindu nationalism's political agendas increasingly relied upon power, masculinity, and strength, both discursively and institutionally. And in contemporary India, the connections between violence and masculinity have become increasingly evident, often reinforcing hegemonic, propertied, high caste, heterosexual Hindu male supremacy. But as per this conference theme, I'm going to talk of alternative or rather subordinate masculinities as an analytical category and a critical trope of social identity in colonial North India. Now, scholars have shown how, basically, so this slide actually talks about how masculinity has been constructed and how the narrative of emasculation provoked a range of responses. So what, scholars have shown basically how Mahatma Gandhi questioned the dominant discourses on masculinity. So in certain ways, he embodied sexual ambiguity and he subverted British notions of masculinity by articulating that feminine was worthier and preferred. So Gandhi glorified sacrifice and the ability to suffer, which he specifically identified with women. So I want to shift the focus and discuss subordinate masculinities through the prism, through two prisms basically. First one is the prism of queer masculinities and homosexuality, and the other is the prism of Dalits in colonial India. So as we know, the classic work of Cornell has been the most important when we talk of masculinities. And Cornell recognizes different forms of masculinity which do not sit side by side. And he flatly rejects the idea of men being a homogeneous group of oppressors. So while hegemonic and dominant masculinities have been often honored, others such as homosexuality and Dalit manhood have been marginalized and stigmatized and seen as a threat to normative masculinity. Am I clear? Is
Yes.
there any problem or is it fine?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
The slides are moving, no?
Yeah, slides are moving. Yes.
Achha. Okay, fine. So first, I'm going to talk of queer politics and homosexuality. So Indian traditions have been often seen as repressive of same-sex desire. And there has been a dominant idea that prior to the 19th century, categories such as homosexual or lesbian were not there in this region. Inchoate sexualities existed, but they were not named. So homosexuality has also been attacked in India, branding it as a sexual import. However, feminists have often challenged such assumptions, and they have tried to show the ancient roots of same-sex desire in this region. And they have argued that certain strands of Indian traditions have been receptive to queer sexualities, though they are often described in religious and mystical terms. The classic work of Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidwai persuasively traces from about 1500 BC up to the present writings in Indian languages about love between women and love between men who are not biologically related. So they argue that a minor homophobic voice that was largely ignored by mainstream society in pre-colonial India, that voice became a dominant voice in the colonial period. And it was deeply intertwined with modern nationalism. So even groups such as Hijras came to be legally criminalized and socially stigmatized. So criminalization of same-sex activity, as we know, was a legal provision which was introduced only in 1861 by the colonial government, when for the first time anti-sodomy laws were passed in the region under section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, its wording was general enough to allow any sexual act to be interpreted as coming under its ambit because it prohibited voluntary carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal. So in the colonial period, it was not just the British, even the colonized, whether it is reformers, revivalists, or nationalists, they all attempted to regulate homosex by insisting that it was alien to Indian culture. Now, Colonialism, however, could not completely override spaces where masculine identities continued to be ambiguously inflected. So, the example of a number of celebrated transvestite performers of the Parsi, Gujarati, and Marathi theatres during the late 19th and early 20th century is a classic example. And the most famous of these included Jai Shankar Sundari and Bal Gandharv of Gujarati and Marathi theatres, respectively. In fact, Gandharv set trends in women's fashion and style. So this theatrical cross-dressing complicated hegemonic notions of masculinity that we broadly, the normative kind of visions of masculinity. I wish to also mention here a book in Hindi titled Chocolate, which has been translated now in English as well. This was published in 1927, and it explicitly focused on homosexuality and sodomy. This book was written by Pandey Bechen Sharma Ugra, who wrote sensational romantic fiction, which was one of the most popular genres of the 1920s. Now, this book was a collection of 8 short stories and variously titled like Oh Beautiful Youth or Transgressive Love, In Jail. So, Jail Mein, Kamariya Nagin Sibal Khaye, Hum Fidaye Lucknow. These are the kinds of titles that these stories had. And written in a titillating style, these stories were against sodomy and homosexuality, and they claimed to draw inspiration from real life incidents. But what happened was that in the process of condemnation, they also acknowledged the wide prevalence of such practices, where the beautiful boys called chocolate, pocketbook, or money order. And chocolate was actually a commercial sensation. And within 6 weeks of its publication, 2 editions were sold out. But what we see is that the upper caste literati who claimed themselves as guardians of morality, they launched a virulent criticism against chocolate and thereby against many similar writings. This was because Ugra was writing on a taboo subject. He was mentioning the unmentionable. He was speaking the unspeakable. So the critics claimed that the actual effect of Ugra's writings was to titillate and excite his readers, and thus to encourage and not discourage homosexual desire. The work also put a question mark on masculine markers. So in many ways, the phobic and the erotic functioned in tandem with each other. I now wish to discuss notions of Dalit manhood in colonial India, an area which has been less explored in both masculinity and in Dalit studies. So while religious identities have remained an important arena for masculinity studies, the same cannot be said with equal authority of caste. So in other words, the relationship between caste, Dalit identities and masculinity has not been easily recognized, particularly in the context of colonial period. Such a lens, I think, challenges rigid associations between masculinity, power, and dominance, while reassessing Dalit subjectivity in colonial India. Dalit masculinity actually was often ambiguous in relation to dominant Hindu male hegemony. So contesting and reinterpreting masculinity, asserting manhood became a means for Dalits to claim dignity, social status, rights, and their agency. We will see how the Dalit body was socially constructed by the upper castes and colonizers on the one hand, and on the other, how Dalits themselves appropriated ideas of masculinity. So, the construction of the Indian male by the British, I've already said that, as weak and lacking in manliness, was further magnified in the construction of Dalit male. His body reflected the abject body of labor, and there was repeated imagery of him as meek, stupid, feminine, dumb, and beautiful. Since Dalit men did hard manual labor, justification for the harsh conditions forced upon them required a representation of their bodies as resilient but dumb-witted. So my examples are from North India because that's the area I have worked, and largely from Hindi literature. So what we see is that an article published in a leading Hindi journal argued that the job of the sweepers was to serve and to protect the grandeur of the rich. So as you see in this code, it's saying that the sweeper has to serve, their homes are kept outside the villages and cities, so that their health remains fine. So it's justifying the oppression and hierarchized caste system. And it is also saying that, the sweepers should continue to be our saviors, continue to be our attendants and serve the upper castes in a selfless way. Another article stated that the untouchables could not do any original work themselves. They could only follow or obey the order of others. So if you're a student, you could upkeep, the books of the upper caste. If you can just clean the sword, of a soldier. If you are with a trader, you can sweep his shop. So in that sense, it is again, the idea that they could do any work of brain, was denied to them. It was said that they could just follow others in many ways. So, and Dalits were depicted as incapable of taking any decisions on their own, including that of religious conversions. As we know, in North India, religious conversions were not so much, but still they were substantial, and there was great anxiety about religious conversions. So, for example, this cartoon on this subject of conversions portrayed Dalit male body as, as feeble, small in stature, and without a mind. Here, he's caricatured as a football and being kicked by the Brahmin Pandit, but being grabbed by the Muslim Maulvi and the Christian Padri. So again, the idea is to also address the upper caste Hindus to treat Dalits, in a humane fashion, but the very treatment of the Dalit body as a football, shows that he or she is depicted as having no mind of her own. Another, for example, showed him as unclaimed property. So again, in this, it is shown that, Muslims are, grabbing the Dalit body. And so in both these kind of images, the Dalit was denied any voice in the matter of religious conversion or anything else. And there were other images too that reinforced the imagery of the weak Dalit body, usually portraying him as dark, and it was set against a white background and an upper caste white well-built body for maximum visual contrast. However, there were other images that crisscrossed with such constructions, especially when Dalits started asking for their rights. So they came to be equally constructed as lecherous criminals, violent, threatening, and uncontainable. The British, in fact, identified a section of Dalits as having criminal attributes as a result of their genetic inheritance, and they assigned them to the lowest position in Hindu ritual hierarchy. And many of these perceptions were actually shared by caste Hindus. So the threat of potent low caste sexuality, especially low caste male sexuality, also provided a basis for controlling upper caste women under the guise of protection. So various didactic manuals gave instructions to women to keep away from low caste men, from Dalit men. And there are also these grave anxieties about sexual play between the upper caste female body and the lower caste or the servant's male body. And so we see there were two broad trends in constructions of Dalit bodies. The desirous body was one that displayed the qualities of an industrious, docile, and willing servant, and the worst were those who not only declined to serve but dared to challenge upper caste supremacy. However, I think I have about 5 or 7 minutes. So, however, what we see is that Dalit men were not just a screen on which high caste men and colonial authorities projected their caste, racial, and gender anxieties. They too attempted to challenge the stereotypes of themselves by asserting their own masculinities in different ways. And sometimes actually it led to a positive assertion of their rights and manhood. So I'm going to discuss just one example of this. So we were talking about religious conversions. Now, religious conversions became a way for a section of Dalits to articulate their masculinities and dignity. Now, conversions have been a tool of the downtrodden, and while they may not bring about radical changes, they emerged in the colonial period as an important tool to challenge hegemonies. So even reformist cartoons acknowledge the change in masculine stature of Dalits, which conversion to Christianity brought about, whether it is in modes of dressing, walking style, gait, and status. So, for example, this cartoon depicts the converted outcast man dressed in a suit, wearing shoes, walking ahead like a sahib, and the unconverted Dalit is walking behind, barefooted, carrying a load on his head. Now, these cartoons were actually published in reformist journals, and they were meant to address the upper castes, actually, but they also the anxieties about conversions, but they also depicted that inadvertently they depicted the change in stature of the Dalit. So they're wearing suits, they're wearing shoes, all these things which were denied low caste men, So, so even in many ways, what is, for example, the converted Dalit man is flaunting his wealth, giving wages to the unconverted Dalit man. And there were also others which depicted converted Dalits playing sports, getting their shoes polished. And as you can see, their height seems to increase just by conversions because they're now standing straight, asserting a certain kind of manhood. Similarly, the strikes by sweepers became another way for assertion of masculinity, and it was articulated in language of protest from the margins. So as you see in this cartoon, the sweeper is, like the king because he's gone on strike, and, the whole city is dirty. So I'm just going to conclude and say that, masculinity can straddle multiple plural and liminal spaces, and it undermines its standardized, homogenized, and rigid categorization. So while parables of hegemonic masculinity reinforce normative codes, making it a site of power, control, and exclusion, subordinate or non-hegemonic masculinities provided us with a different lens, showing that it is context that determine expressions of masculinity. Operating from the margins, such subordinate or marginal masculinities functioned as both survival strategies and acts of resistance. They hinted at fluid and shifting masculine identities, which were open to creative transactions and diverse aspirations. Manhood could sometimes become a critical methodology of the marginalized, a language of rights, dissent, liberation, and enfranchisement, and a marker of an egalitarian social order. So I'm going to stop sharing, and that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.